Hi everyone, and welcome to ANZ's quarterly webinar, so where we're celebrating International Day of People with Disability. Before we get started, I'd just like to run through a few housekeeping rules, and then we'll obviously introduce our key speaker for the day. In terms of questions, we will be reserving questions to the end of the session. So please do type any questions that you have into either the chat function, or we will be taking questions over the phone as well. So towards the end of the session, we'll open up for questions for about 10 or 15 minutes at the end, so you get an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. We'd also just like to flag that we do have AI Media on the phone today, so AI Media will be providing our live captioning for some of our participants today. So if one person could speak at a time, that would be fantastic. And also just to flag, we are recording our session today, so for anyone who may be speaking, we'll be recording the session today. My colleague Olivia is with me today. She will be adding in any hashtags or any use if you are a keen tweeter or social media user. So please feel free to tweet or share the information that you learned today via social media. And I'd also just like to ask if everyone could mute their phone at their end, just to minimise any background noise. That would be great too. You know, obviously we might be dialing in from our desk, so it'd be great if we could just minimise any background noise. So without further ado, I might introduce then Randy Lewis to everyone. Randy was Senior Vice President of Walgreens in the US. Randy pioneered an employment model that resulted in employees with disability making up approximately 20% of the workforce in Walgreens distribution centres, working under the same conditions as their colleagues without disability. Considered the gold standard of disability employment by the National Governors Association, the program has subsequently replicated in companies both domestically and abroad, including Proctor and Gamble, UPS, Lowe's and Marks and Spencer's. Recognised as a visionary of disability employment advocacy around the world, Randy is a sought-after speaker on the lessons learned that apply to all business and community leaders who seek to make a difference. Randy is also the founder of the NOGWOG Disability Initiative, of which we have shared the hashtag, and Olivia will continue to do so, created to assist businesses and communities to develop and launch their own disability hiring programs. So Randy, over to you.
Great. Oh, by the way, this is my first webinar ever in my life.
Very privileged.
We're going to see how this goes today. Well, hello everyone. I feel like I'm on a radio show. I can maybe start announcing a football game for you, but I will try to do this. I want to share a story with you today, and it all begins with this question. And as advocates, I think this is a pretty good question to ask people. What if there are people out there who we can't get to who would be great employees? Where we started, and that's what led to this whole story that I'm going to take you through. And so once you answer the question, well, there might be people out there that can do the job that we can't get to, the question becomes, what am I willing to do? And that's where we are. So let's back up into the story where this all started. This is my family. Girl, boy, girl. Oldest is the daughter on the right-hand side. She's 34 today. My son, Austin, is 31, and on the left, I think her name is Allison. She's 29. And I think most of us parents would agree that every child is a lesson. Sometimes for what our children do, sometimes for what they say, sometimes just who they are. Austin has autism. He was diagnosed at age 3. He didn't speak until he was 10. And if you ever get a chance to talk to him, you will think he's trying to make up for lost time. He has a driver's license and a car. And he serves sometimes as my chauffeur to the airport. I live in Chicago, and it's about a 30-minute drive. I pay him $20 to take me to the airport. A cab would cost me $50, And I haven't told Austin that yet because he seems to be pretty happy with the $20. So we'll just leave it at that, and I will not give you his address to tell him anything differently. But every experience is the same. He'll get up early morning flight. He'll take the bag downstairs. We'll drive to the airport, pull up to the terminal, and every time it's the same thing. I will turn to Austin and say, Austin, you got me here on time, and you got me here safely. And I love you. And every time, Austin will turn to me and say, $20. But even though Austin has a lot of skills, he has a lot of challenges too. He reads at the level of primary school probably. He has difficulty with arithmetic, especially multiplication and division. He's never received or written an email. He has no peer friends, never been invited to a party, and I've never played a game with my own son, not even a game of catch in the backyard. And if he were like other kids like him, he would never be offered a job. Something we parents start thinking about almost the instant we get the bad news, because we know what's waiting for them. And when it comes to getting a job, if a driver's license were like the equivalent for our other children, like a equivalent of a graduating from the finest college with the highest grades, with the highest honors, a job would be like a Nobel Prize. Because a job can mean security, relationships, opportunity. And one thing I learned about through Austin was to look past the disability to see the person. And a person who I continually underestimated. Austin has surprised me over and over with the things that he can do. Last weekend, we were out of town, and Austin got himself to the airport, got a taxi to get to the airport, got himself on the airplane, and flew across the country to visit relatives, and got himself back home. Now, not without some hiccups, but I would have never dreamed that he would be capable of doing that. And so I got to thinking, here I work for this huge company with thousands of employees, and I'm laying in my bed at night staring at the ceiling, and I'm wondering about my fellow employees, most of whom work in our stores, many of whom work 2 jobs just to make ends meet. And if I'm laying in bed staring at the ceiling, what are they doing? So, and if a company like ours, a successful company, couldn't do anything about this, which company can? And specifically, in my role as head of supply chain, if I couldn't do something about this, who would? So just taking that idea, we decided, let's try to do something. And what we did is some of our centers went out and contracted with local agencies who serve people with disabilities, and we contracted with them. And they would bring people with disabilities into our distribution centers with their own management, and we gave them ancillary tasks like custodial or tagging merchandise, the simple tasks to do that we thought would be applicable for people with disabilities. And the communities in which we were in thought we were heroes. They were talking about what a great corporate responsibility, and they wanted to give us awards. And our managers said, this is working great. People are coming in. They want to come in on weekends to work, or if it's snowing and our other employees aren't coming in, this is a group of people who will get there. And we've given them team member T-shirts and team member badges so they feel part of us, and so on and so on. So one day I was down in our Dallas center, and this woman comes up to me, and she tells me, starts talking about the group and how fantastic it is, and all these things I'd heard before, and I didn't know who this woman was. And she shows me this picture, and she's in the picture, and I'm thinking, who is this woman? And she must have seen the confusion on my face, because she said, oh, I'm not one of them. I'm their sponsor. They weren't doing mission critical work. They weren't doing the same jobs we were doing. They weren't earning the same pay, and they weren't us. So the thinking was then, we have these people in our buildings. We've worked along. We've seen them work. We've seen how they're loyal. They try to give it their best. Certainly some of those would be appropriate as our employees. So let's hire them. Let's hire some people, and we did here and there, and it worked out well. One of those people we hired was a gentleman named Chuck. Chuck is on the autism spectrum. That's what we say now. And people ask me, well, how wide is the spectrum? Well, guess what? We're all on the spectrum. It's just a question of where we are. But Chuck's on the high end of the spectrum. He came in every day, did his job. We asked for volunteers who would be willing to work with a person with a disability, and people volunteered. And these two ladies volunteered, said, yeah, we'll work with Chuck. And Chuck did a great job, like I said, but he had some weird things about him. One thing we found out his favorite color was purple. And the reason we know that is because whenever a purple carton would pass through his area about 1 or 2 times a day, Chuck would stop and jump up and down with glee and dance, calling everybody's attention to the purple tote, to the purple case. That was something we had never seen in our centers in all these years. So management got together, and it was kind of scary. They thought, is this appropriate behavior for the workplace? And it didn't take them very long to get to the point saying, well, which do we prefer? Results or style? Results, let's go with results. And really, which do we prefer, dancing or complaining? Dancing, complaining. Let's go with the dancing. So Chuck taught us a couple of things. That performance comes in lots of different styles. And then when I asked those two ladies when I was on a visit there, I said, because I wanted to know how Chuck was doing, I said, in this building of 500 people, has anybody said anything about Chuck? Have they made a snide remark, or he makes them uncomfortable? And the lady looked at me and she said, well, if anybody has a problem with Chuck, they have a problem with us. Now we were making progress. So when it came the opportunity to build a brand new distribution center in Anderson, South Carolina, we were going to build a new generation of centers. It was going to be the most automated we'd ever built and the most expensive. And we thought maybe we can just tweak it, just tweak the design a little bit to enable a large number of people with disabilities to perform as well as anybody in the world. And if we were going to do it, we didn't have to be reminded that we're a business, not a charity. We have razor-thin margins and very demanding shareholders. So if we were going to do this, people with disabilities would perform the same jobs, earn the same pay, and be held to the same performance standards. Same. And also, we wanted to hire a large number of people with disabilities. And remembering Chuck's experience with those two women, and I asked an autism expert saying, how many typically able people without disabilities, how many typically abled workers would we need as peer mentors for each person, let's say, with autism? We thought that was a difficult disability. And he said, 2, I guess. So therefore, we had our study. 1/3 of the workforce would be people with disabilities. Something that had never been done on this scale anywhere in the world, and we looked. We couldn't find it. And we picked that number, a high number, for a couple of reasons. One was one of the objectives, besides hiring a large number of people with disabilities and giving them an opportunity that they might not have otherwise, we wanted to demonstrate to the world, when we were successful, that people with disabilities could do the job. And when you have 1/3 of your workforce, you cannot give them mascot jobs. You cannot carry 1/3 of your workforce. So that was key. And the other thing, the challenge of doing something that had never been done before, because it would require that we be creative and it required that we give our best. So we presented it to the board. And the board had one question. We told them we were going to build this building. It's going to be super efficient. It had a good return on investment, which they liked. And then I said, we're going to hire a large number of people with disabilities. They only had one question. What if it doesn't work? And we said, we will adjust, just like we do with any other new initiative. We'll adjust. So what the question really was, and sometimes saying, are we going to make our business objectives or we're going to hire people with disabilities? We said we can do both. So the question was, we can do both, we don't have to give up. Now we knew that we would have problems finding people, and we knew that they would not be able to get through our traditional hiring practices, because we send out requisitions and we look at resumes and the work history, and they have to be able to interview well, and we knew that this would be a struggle for a lot of the population. And specifically, as a parent and an employer, I knew that people like Austin would have a lot of difficulty. People with disabilities don't learn the way we're used to teaching. They don't have the work history that we're looking for. They probably don't interview well. They may look different, act different, seem different, think different. And the unkindest cut is the belief by most of us that hiring a person with a disability is a great thing to do if you can afford it. But people with disabilities really can't do the job as well. So knowing that, and also seeing the experience of Chuck and all the others that we had hired, we said, well, let's figure out a different way to find and select. So what we're going to do is we're going to give them a chance to prove they can do the job. We're going to have an alternative door. And it's going to work like with internships or temps. We work with temp agencies all the time. So let's use something, modify something that we already have. So let's create an alternative door, whereas we'll find some social agencies that have access to people with disabilities, because we didn't know anything about disabilities, and we recognized we don't know how to assess people with disabilities. We don't know any of that, but what we'll do is we'll find an agency and we'll tell them we want to hire this number of people over this period. Let's say 12 weeks. We want a class of, in our first, when we were getting ready to open, we said we want 75 people day one to start into a 12-week program on the job. We want them to come, we want the agency to come in, understand our jobs, go out in the community, find the people that they think will be successful. We'll bring them in for 12 weeks. The agency provides job coaches because we don't know anything about disabilities, but we'll manage the work. They will work on the job and be paid that 12 weeks. And when they're successful, they're hired. As simple as that. So we made the announcement. And when we made the announcement that we were going to hire 200 people with disabilities in Anderson, South Carolina, there'd be 200 of 600 total employees, you would have thought we had cured cancer, the way the media responded to it. It made news across the United States, and it really surprised me. Is the situation so desperate that hiring 200 people with disabilities is national news? So one of the people who heard the story was Desiree Neff. Desiree was working in San Diego, California as a temp. Desiree has a rare muscle condition that requires that she use a walker occasionally. One day, Desiree comes into her job using the walker, and her boss says, "What's the deal with the walker?" Desiree says, "I don't need it all the time, but I do need it occasionally." And her boss said, "Great, come back when you don't." Desiree packed up her family, moved across the country to South Carolina a year before we opened, just for the chance to apply. And today, she's a manager in that building. And had we not been looking for people with disabilities, we would have passed on Desiree too. Because we want our people to be able to work in any area of the building. And we have some places that are not accessible with a walker. So we would have said, "You're really not qualified because you can't be in all the places." And we would have missed out on Desiree. Ask, what kind of disabilities can we not, are not appropriate, that you couldn't hire, that couldn't do the job? And early on, I remember the question, are we going to hire people with mental illness? Because that's a scary one. We're going to hire people with mental illness. And thinking through that, I remember thinking, I know already we have people with depression, shifting personalities, paranoia, explosive anger disorder, obsessive compulsiveness, and that's just a senior executive team at Walgreens. So why not? And we did. And we got some terrific employees. We got, this is Angie. Angie graduated with highest honors from college and couldn't find a job in the commercial sector because she has cerebral palsy. She walks, she calls it her sexy walk, and she can speak. And Angie is probably the best human resources person I've ever worked with. And she's running her own building in Georgia now. And we would have passed on Angie too, because we would have thought things like, oh, it's really loud out there on the work floor, and some people may have difficulty understanding Angie. Or what if there's a fire and she can't walk fast enough to get out? Maybe we should go to the next candidate. We would have done that. And we would have missed out on Angie. And we would have missed out on Harrison. Harrison came out of the high school. He has autism. He performs every job we've given him at 150% standard. Every job. Harrison would have never gotten through our online application because it has an arithmetic test, and he cannot multiply 10 times 60. And there are hundreds like him. And people ask how it turned out. This is the number of people with disabilities in that one building, that first building. And it has grown. Instead of being 30%, we had 40% of this workforce in this first building. And people say, well, how did you manage them? How are you able to manage? Because we have all kinds of disabilities. We don't tell people on the floor who has a disability or not. You just kind of figure it out. What's your the secret? I'm going to tell you the secret. It's a special technology, and it's called. Let me back up real quick. I forgot to tell you, because everybody wants to know, how did it work out? We published the results. People with disabilities perform the same. have less turnover, and they work safer. That's what everybody really wants to know. And then they'll ask, how did you do it? So here's the secret. ATP. Ask the person. For instance, our procedures say, the standard procedure, if you're going to handle a case, you have to use both hands to do it safely. So if a person were to apply, a person with only one hand or one arm, we would say, you're not qualified to do the work. Now, we asked the person how they would do the work, because in all likelihood, they've had a lifetime of trying to adjust. My favorite example is forklift drivers, deaf forklift drivers. Forklifts are silent, very dangerous around pedestrians, kind of like a Prius in a parking lot sort of thing. So, each forklift is equipped with a horn. And every standard procedure across the world for anybody that gets on a forklift, the procedure is test your horn in the morning. And anytime you come to an intersection or blind or around pedestrians, tap your horn so they're aware of the hazard. So a lot of people don't, how can a deaf person, if they can't test their horn, be qualified to drive a forklift? So we applied, asked the person. We asked a deaf person, how would you know, how would you test your horn? First person said, well, what I would do is I would put my hand on the forklift on the part in front of it near the horn, and I would tap the button and I would feel the vibration. That made sense. I like the second person's answer better. And how would you test your horn? And he said, well, what I would do is I would pull up behind a group of people who are just talking and sound the horn and see who jumps. Now, as a result of just applying this, we have over 70 drivers who are deaf on our forklifts. And the safety record is twice as good for people who are deaf as it is as drivers who are not deaf. And even one of our engineers, after seeing the data, suggested that we put earplugs on all our drivers that might make it better. The thing that really surprised us, though, was the impact on culture. We hoped that people with disabilities could do the job, which they did. The safety kind of surprised us, which was a pleasant surprise. The retention, not so much, because we knew that people with disabilities probably were very reluctant to leave and take a chance at another place. That didn't surprise us so much. But the impact on culture did. Managers will talk about how they've had to become better listeners, how they've had to focus on each person as an individual, how they've had to see what motivates each person, about how it's about us and not about me, on and on. And even the university came in and studied it and produced a report, which I'm going to make available to you, an academic study that won some awards that confirmed that. But I think it's better if we are able to hear the managers themselves talk about what it's like to manage in that building. So I'm going to show you a film, and they're going to be able to hear it, won't they?
We don't have the film uploaded, but we'll send the link around.
Well, here's the great thing. It's captioned. So that's going to be good. So you're going to just imagine the most incredible voices telling you this story that you're going to see like a silent movie. But it's still worth seeing. And we'll get through it. It's not that long. It's about 2 minutes. So here's the question they're answering, essentially. What's different about working here than it is when you work somewhere else? And so let's just see the movie.
The video won't play just due to technology issues, Randy. So
okay, so I'll tell you about it.
Yeah.
It was really good, and it's a short movie.
We'll share the link out with everybody.
Okay, so they can see it later.
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah. I got to wait 2 minutes before I can say anything else because that's the way I always do this. Boy, that hurt. All right, so we're back. Wasn't that good? So, what happened, we spread this out to all the rest of our centers. It moved out to all the rest of our centers. And that original 200 people, this is what it looks like today. 2,000 people, 20% of the work. Buildings that have no automation, lots of automation, all different kinds. And a lot of companies have come and they've seen it for themselves. We invite them to come in. We call it the Yes Virginia There Is a Santa Claus tour. Because they come into the building, they walk around, and they always ask the same question. Where are the people with disabilities? Because all they see are people working. So here's some of the companies that have come, and they've launched all their own initiatives. Marks and Spencer in the UK. Most of the rest of these are in the U.S., but I'm going to have to put Woolworths on there too because they're going to use the same model. So Australia is going to show up on this next. I'll put them right in the middle.
Yeah, great.
For everybody. But and we let them go through the building, and then we let them meet with management and ask all the difficult questions like, what's a bad day like here? Does this really work? What was the hardest thing to do? How do you terminate a person with a disability? The answer to that one is, how do you terminate a person without a disability? Because if you feel uncomfortable about terminating a person with a disability, you're probably doing it wrong for everybody else. And we were very fortunate to have that happen. So here's what I've left behind. I'm going to leave behind. We have this as an outline. They can see that. Mm-hmm. And you can go online and you can see that movie. So I suspect everybody on the computer is going to drop off the webinar and go see the movie. And you can see the magazine article about safety and performance, and you can see that academic study. And if you're really interested, you can go out on Amazon and buy a book that I wrote about it after I retired, because I wanted to, while I remembered this story, to be able to tell the story. And so that's available. Now, people will ask me, what was the most difficult thing about doing this? And I've talked to other leaders that have done this. I have a meeting once a year of my counterparts, and we get together and we talk about this. None of those other leaders that did these at other companies have a person with a disability in their family that I know of. And I always ask them the same question. Why did you do this? And it's always a version of, we were unfairly leaving people behind. That's why they do it. They use the cost-benefit study to justify it, but it's always a bigger reason why they do it. And so the biggest impediment is fear. It's our own fear. It's the fear of those above us who have to approve it, and it's the fear of those below it who have to implement it. And it's, what if I do something wrong? What if I make a mistake? Or what if I fail? Will I lose my status, my authority? Will I look dumb? On and on and on. And I know fear. Fear has kept me quiet when I should have spoken up in meetings or with individuals, or calling out things that were wrong, or speaking my opinion to power. It's kept me quiet, and it's kept me still when I should have acted. That happens to us all. Fear makes us small. So to illustrate that, and it's easy to say, I'm just one person. I'm just one person. What can I do? This problem is so big. I'm just one person. I was in California, and I passed by a shoe shine stand. And the guy there calls me out. He says, your shoes look bad. You need to come over here and I can take care of your shoes. So, I mean, with that sales pitch, you have to go along. So he starts working on my shoes. And while he's sitting there, we get to talking. And I remember his name. His name was Alan Feaster. And I asked him how long he had been shining shoes. And he said, well, I've been several years. And I said, "Now, are you thinking about retiring?" And he said, "Yes, I am." I said, "Really? What are you going to do?" He says, I think I'm going to change the California prison system." Now, that wasn't even on my list of anticipated answers. Not even in the stack of things I would have thought he would have said. And he proceeded to tell me about his son Durrell. His son got in trouble with the law and was sentenced to the California Youth Authority. It's a facility for young offenders age 14 to age 21. And within a few weeks of being there, his son committed suicide by hanging himself. And Alan said, "My son was not so desperate when he went in there. Something took away all his hope. There's something wrong with putting in boys in with men, and I want to change that." And he pulled out this binder, and it had clippings of newspaper and magazines, and it had his picture and all these things, and it has even him testifying before the California legislature. And that was about 10 years ago when I met Alan. And I would keep up, occasionally I would go on Google and look him up and see what was going on, and he progressed. Now, what happened? Alan launched a movement that ended up shutting down every one of the California Youth Authority facilities and reformed the entire state of California's youth justice system. A man whose office is a shoe shine stand. And we say, "I'm just one person." For all of us that have been working on this and have done this work, it has turned out to be the most meaningful work of our lives, without a doubt. If you talk to all these people, the thing that they're most proud of is they were able to make a difference in somebody's life. And I will finish with a story that confirms that for me. There's a saying in the Talmud and the Quran, "Save one life and you save the world." Have you heard that? Well, I'll tell you about a young man. I have a young man in my church. He's a year older too than Austin. His name is Richard Fleer. He's on the autism scale. He has higher functioning than Austin. He's loud. He's big. He's boisterous. And ever since he was a little boy, I've known him, and his mom came up to me one time and said, "Could you help Richard find a job at Walgreens?" And I did. I helped find him a job in the mailroom. And every time I would see his mother, she would thank me for helping Richard. A little thing, just a crumb off my table, but it made all the difference to her. So one Christmas Eve, the tradition of, we're Anglican, so we got a lot of flowers and a lot of smells and bells and everything when we go to church on Christmas Eve. So my wife is in the choir, and so is Richard's mother. So I show up. I'm alone. My wife's in the choir. Richard shows up in his suit, Christmas Eve. His mom's in the choir, and Richard loves me, and I love Richard. And he's loud. "Hi, Randy, how you doing? It's good to see you." So we sit down together, and we sing the hymns, the carols, and Richard's loud and joyous and all that. And we would sit down, and the readings and the sermon and all. In case Richard and I would look at each other and nod to each other knowingly, like we know we've got it going on. And afterwards, after the service, we go out to the car. It's starting to snow and all that. And I sit there, and I'm getting ready to start the car, and I turn to my wife, and I say, "I can't remember a single song that we sang. I can't remember a single verse that they read or anything that the minister said. but that was the best Christmas Eve service of my life. And knowing that I was able to make a difference in Richard's life justifies my whole career. One person, not the 200, not the 2,000, just knowing I had an effect on him made it all worthwhile. That's the value of this work. That is the great gift it gave to me, and it gives to us who pick up the yoke and try to move the world forward. And I hope you have enjoyed it, especially that movie you got to see.
Thanks, Randy. So thank you for your presentation. We'd like to open up for questions. If anyone does have a question, we're getting thank yous through on the message system, but if anyone has a question that you'd either like to type into the chat function or ask over the phone, you'd be more than welcome to ask. We've got a couple of minutes left. So any questions on the phone or via the chat function? Or in the room. I am joined by my colleagues from A&D, so anyone in the room as well. No?
I have a question.
Thanks, Dad.
What would you say was the most impactful way to change someone's mind who was resistant to the change that you were wanting to implement?
The best way was they saw the reality once it happened. Some people embraced this immediately. Some people were skeptical. But when we started the first building, that was all new management, so we were lucky. I was able to pick a GM that volunteered for it. You ask for it when you want to do something new, because you don't have to keep convincing them. And when we hired new managers or new people, we said, we're going to hire a lot of people with disabilities here. And so they self-selected out. Most people had never worked with a person with a disability. And their biggest issue was to take away the fear. So we said, look, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes with people with disabilities. You're going to use the wrong word, or you're going to say something or whatever. Guess what? Intent matters. If the intent is good, don't worry about it. We make mistakes all the time. What do? We learn from them, we correct them, and we move forward. So I think most of the resistance came from fear, not from... Everybody wanted people with disabilities to succeed. I mean, everybody does. It's just usually like, but if it doesn't work, how's it going to hurt me? And we just had to deal with the fear.
Thanks, Randy. Any other questions? Anyone like to use the phone to ask a question? Or I think we've got something come through here from Amber. So a question, what are some of the first steps employers can take to hiring people with disability or becoming disability confident? If they're at the beginning of their journey, what would you sort of recommend?
Well, there are two ways of doing this. There's one I call the Field of Dreams approach. Did everybody see that movie? They build out in the cornfield, they build a baseball field, and the baseball players show up. I call that the Field of Dreams approach. That is, okay, we're going to make it easier for people with disabilities to work here. So we're going to put it in a centralized accommodation system, or we're going to make it more accessible. It's building the Field of Dreams, and all of a sudden people with disabilities are going to show up.
Sorry, someone has put their phone on.
I'm going to type that in. Sorry, Randy. Others can still hear, but someone will have put the phone on hold. Unfortunately.
So you're shaming them?
Yeah, I'm just going to ask, who is that?
Especially if they left.
I know. If we continue just answering the question, can you still hear us for this final question?
Yeah, it's just nice background sound.
Okay. All right. Maybe we can finish the question and we'll wrap it
Oh,
up.
that's my phone. I'm sorry. It feels pretty smooth. It's smooth jazz. No, it's kind of like... All right, I'll try to speak over it. Here's the thing. That's the field of dreams. We don't know what we should do because you don't know people with disabilities. Doing things like that are the institutional part that comes after the change that preserves the change. That's what bureaucracy does. What we said instead, we don't know all this stuff. We're going to set a goal, a specific goal, and then we're going to organize to achieve the goal. That's what, this is a straight line. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. That's what we did. And I think that's faster. You make mistakes quickly and inexpensively and learn the fastest. So if an employer asks what should they do, make the decision they're going to hire people with disabilities, find an executive champion who has the desire, the opportunity, and the authority to do it. Not somebody else's area where people with disabilities, where the executive says, I want people with disabilities in my area. That's one. Get an executive champion. Do it. They're going to be the energy behind it, and they're going to provide the protection for those who have to implement it. Second, think through why you're doing this. What's your big dream? Because when you fail, the big dream, like in our case, we're going to change the world. We're going to demonstrate to the world that people with disabilities can do this. When we failed with the Enclave, we still had the big dream, and that keeps you going when you fail. Find a place where you can start of risk, what you're going to learn, and the likelihood of success, and have a measure around it. That's what I call the mountain, and that's in the notes they'll send. Have an alternative way into the business like we did with the attempt to hire, and find the local general manager that is smart, good at it, good at being a good manager, leader, and who has the heart to do this, because when the executive champion's not there, it's the local people that everybody looks to. And then find a supplier, what I call an outfitter, who has access to people with disabilities, understand our jobs, and help onboard them through the process. 5 things, and when I see people that have not done what they hope to do, it's typically a failure of an executive champion who really doesn't keep driving it, or they can't find a supplier who can supply. But it's as easy. This is not rocket science. If we make 3% margin, and we're just a simple retailer, if we can do this, anybody can do it. It doesn't, and we didn't spend any more money than we would otherwise. Now that we've been through it, now the changes, the institutional changes, we've learned by doing. A lot of the things, for example, ATP, we learned that. We didn't know it on the front end. The problems we anticipated didn't happen, and the problems we didn't anticipate did happen. There's nothing like actually doing it to learn what you don't know.
I actually got one more question here, Randy. Do you mind answering one more?
Sure.
So Catherine's asked, what are the important messages to encourage other senior leaders to set these goals and targets for employing people with disability?
To read that again. The first part, I know, but the last
What
part.
are the important messages to encourage other senior leaders to set goals and set targets?
Well, don't worry about jobs for people with disabilities, because you don't know what the jobs are for people with disabilities. Because unless we can even, well, of course, we're talking to the choir here, but go out in the regular population and ask people the following 2 questions. Think of a person with a disability, and most people can do that. They have a mental image in their head. Think of a person with a disability. Question 1. Question 2. Think of an appropriate job for that person with a disability. And most people will conjure up a vision pretty quick. Then you ask them, who is not thinking of a person with an intellectual or cognitive disability, or a person in a wheelchair, or a deaf person? Because 80% of the time, that's what everybody's thinking of. And then say, that job you're thinking of, when you describe it, would you include the word repetitive? Because that's what comes up. Our paradigms are wrong. Start with jobs, not jobs for people with disabilities. We didn't compromise on any of our standards. But in the United States today, 2 out of 3 people that are looking for a job, and we have very low unemployment. 2 out of 3 people are people with disabilities. We're overlooking 2/3 of the potential workforce today by not looking for people with disabilities. Don't compromise on standards. Start with jobs and find the right people with disabilities that can do the jobs. And it goes right back to that original question. What if there are great people out there that can do the job as well, but we can't get to them? What are we going to do?
Thank you. Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank Randy Lewis for an excellent presentation and for answering our questions today. So thank you. Thanks for your time. As mentioned, we will send around the information, so the video link. We will save the webinar to the members section of the website. And I'd also like to thank everyone for dialing in, so all of our participants. Thank you for dialing in today and for asking the questions that you asked. And thanks again to Randy.
That's great being here. Thank you.
And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.